understand myself better now. I see how my father shaped me, how my friends reflected my wounds back to me, how pain was passed around like a language no one chose to speak. And still, I love them, not blindly, not closely, but truthfully, from a distance that protects my growth, because understanding doesn't erase the pain. It reveals its roots. And that's how the cycle ends. Not with hate, but with clarity. There's a strange kind of pain that no one warns you about. It's not the wounds left by those who hurt you. It's the wounds you thought you had already healed, until someone comes along and touches them. I grew up in a house where love was measured in obedience. A house where every breath, every choice, every silence was something to be controlled. My father wasn't violent with his hands. His weapon was his authority, his silence, his unspoken disappointment that filled the air like a storm you could never escape. And so I adapted, the way any child desperate for love adapts. I became perfect. I became careful. I became the version of myself that would be least likely to be punished. Somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, I built a life that looked safe from the outside, but inside, it felt like exile, because perfection is a lonely kind of survival. But this story I'm telling you, it's not just about me. It could be me. It could be you. It could be your friend, your lover, your brother. Any one of us who has ever carried a wound so long that we mistook it for our reflection. And sometimes, it takes another wounded soul to wake us up. Not by saving us, but by irritating the parts of us that are still bleeding underneath the surface. It's like walking through a forest with old cuts you thought had healed, and brushing past a thorny branch that tears them open again. You didn't even know the scar was so tender. You didn't know healing meant walking this close to old pain. Sometimes, it's not the violence that breaks you. It's the accidental touch, the innocent brushing against an ache you forgot you were carrying, as if life itself had conspired, in its quiet, mysterious way, to place the right person in your path at the right moment. Before we go deeper, think about it. Is there someone in your life right now who triggers you more than you understand? Let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up under a gaze that expected perfection. Not excellence, not passion, but silent, obedient perfection. Every decision was a potential betrayal. Every mistake felt like proof that love was conditional. My father praised me, but only in fragments, only with shadows attached. If I did well at school, he would say, "Good, but your brother is better at mathematics." If I ran fast at sports, he would smile and say, "You're fast, but when I was your age, I was faster." No matter what I achieved, there was always a subtle undertow, a reminder that I was never quite enough, that my victories were not victories, just temporary, conditional moments of being seen. He welcomed discussions. At first, he encouraged my curiosity, my questions. But the moment my thoughts diverged from his, the moment I dared offer a different logic, a different conclusion than his own, something shifted. A long argument would follow, and if I held my ground too well, if I dared to prove him wrong, he would grow furious, his voice would tighten, his authority would thunder down. It didn't matter if I was right. In his world, he had to win every discussion. He had to be the last voice standing. And so, without even knowing it, I learned a lesson far more dangerous than obedience. I learned that being right was not about truth. It was about survival. I learned that my worth was tied to winning arguments, to proving myself endlessly, to becoming invincible through logic, perfection, certainty. And there was another layer, deeper, even more confusing. He taught me about morality. He told me to like my classmates, not to compete directly with them. Be kind, he said. Don't see your friends as rivals. But at the same time, he made it clear I was expected to be the best. You are not in competition with them, he would say. You are in competition with the perfect score. You are in competition with 100%. No errors, no mistakes, no room for less than total success. And by being perfect, by chasing 100% without ever touching another, I would, inevitably, be the first. Without meaning to, he taught me to be separate, to hide my hunger to succeed behind a mask of humility, to walk among others, but never truly beside them. Even victory became lonely. Even excellence became exile. This is how survival looks when love is earned. You don't ask for what you need. You become what is needed. But that survival comes at a price. You become a stranger to yourself. You build a life where you are tolerated, admired even, but never truly seen. And deep inside, you carry the silent story. I must be perfect to deserve belonging. I must be right to deserve respect. I must be the best, without letting anyone see I was trying. And even later, long after childhood faded, the war continued inside me, the endless need to prove, to defend, to be beyond reproach. As if somewhere inside I was still that small child standing before a disappointed father, pleading without words, see me, accept me, let me be enough. Years later, I met someone who carried wounds very different from mine. And yet somehow he became my friend. A friend whose pain touched the same broken chords inside me. His father's violence had been physical, blows instead of words, explosions instead of cold silences. And from that soil of pain, he had grown into a man chasing perfection. But a different kind of perfection than mine. Not the silent, invisible perfection of obedience, but the visible, dazzling perfection of admiration. He wanted to be the best dancer on the stage, the most athletic, the one who spoke the most languages, the brightest flame in any room. He needed the eyes of others, their applause, their approval, as if each look of admiration could stitch together the places inside him that violence had torn apart. But there was another side to him, a softer, more crumbling side. When life asked him to stand tall, to carry responsibility, to face authority, to plant his feet firmly in the ground, he collapsed. He could be brilliant in the moments that asked for spectacle, but helpless when life asked for structure, for groundedness, for self-leadership. He would shrink, defer, blame, become a victim again. Authority terrified him, even when it came cloaked in kindness. He saw authority figures everywhere, in his doctors, in his therapists, even in friends who dared to offer advice. And so even the ones trying to help him became enemies in his eyes. Even gentle hands felt like the fists of the past. Even healing voices sounded like accusations. And somewhere along the way, despite it all, he became my friend. Not just someone I observed from a distance, but someone I cared about. Someone I tried to walk beside through the thick fog of their unhealed wounds. In the beginning, our friendship was built on a kind of reciprocal empathy. We both carried our pain. We both recognized something unspoken in each other. It felt comforting, even healing at times. The silent understanding of two souls that had survived the same war, even if by different paths. But over time, I began to see that it wasn't true empathy. It was something else. Codependency. Codependency is when two people unconsciously support each other's wounds rather than helping each other heal. It's when your connection is not based on growth, but on maintaining a shared story of helplessness. It's when being needed becomes more important than being whole. Without realizing it, we were both supporting the same narrative, that we were victims of life, victims of fate, victims of the people who hurt us. We reinforced each other's sorrow, our helplessness, our unspoken belief that healing was something that could happen without choosing responsibility. At first it felt like loyalty, like love. But true love does not chain you to your own suffering. As I slowly began waking up to my own trauma, as I became conscious that survival had shaped me but did not have to define me, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could stay trapped in the old story, a victim forever, or I could become something else, a survivor who chooses to heal, a human being who accepts the responsibility of their own fate. I was beginning the long and painful path that Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. It is about gathering back the lost parts of yourself, even the parts you once despised, and weaving them into a new conscious life. And that meant facing my shadow. The shadow, as Jung taught us, is everything inside us that we refuse to see, everything we fear, everything we shame, everything we exile into the dark. It is not evil. It is simply rejected life, my helplessness, my fear of responsibility, my anger, my longing to be saved. These were not defects. They were parts of my soul that had been abandoned because they did not fit the image of survival I once had to create. True healing meant not suppressing them further, but turning toward them with new eyes. It meant owning the part of me that had once needed to be a victim in order to survive. And it meant choosing, consciously, fiercely, not to live trapped in that identity anymore. And so I began to change my path. I decided to take responsibility for my life. I returned to work. I returned to serious study. At the same time as working, I enrolled in a demanding diploma program to deepen my knowledge in a specific field, a full year of intense, careful learning. Because in medicine, responsibility is not optional. Lives depend on it. One day he came to visit me. At the time, he wasn't working, not even in his own field. I told him I was happy to be back at work, and that I was also pursuing studies alongside my job. He casually asked what kind of studies I was doing. I told him about my work and my education, about the diploma I was working toward while handling my professional responsibilities. He asked me to show him something I was learning. Knowing he wasn't from the medical world, I chose a very simple example, something a non-specialist could understand. I explained it carefully, respectfully, and then he mocked me. He laughed at what I showed him. He said, "All that for a whole year of study? That's too easy." I tried to explain that the example was simple only because I had chosen it for him, that the real work was far deeper, far more complex, far more serious. But it didn't matter. The mockery had already fallen between us like a wall, but as I looked at him, something softened inside me. In his laughter, I heard something deeper than cruelty. I heard fear. Fear that if I grew beyond the stories we once shared, he would be left alone inside his own. And somehow, even then, I understood. His mockery was not truly about belittling me. It was a defense against the terror of being abandoned by those who dared to heal. Here was a man who could not carry even his own professional responsibilities, a man drowning in his own unhealed helplessness. And yet, he was minimizing the work, the seriousness, the dedication of someone who had chosen to rise. And I saw it so clearly then. It wasn't truly about me. It was about the terror that my growth, my responsibility, my healing awakened inside him. Because every step I took toward becoming whole was a mirror, showing him the places where he still refused to walk. And so I began to shift even more. I started to become clearer. I started to reflect instead of rescue, to speak with more honesty instead of endless accommodation. I stopped validating the endless cycles of powerlessness. I started holding myself and life to a higher standard. It was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of returning to myself. At first, I listened to him with patience. I remembered my own battles and I wanted to offer him the understanding I once needed. But slowly, something inside me began to shift. Every time I offered encouragement, he heard criticism. Every time I extended my hand, he recoiled as if struck. It didn't matter what I said. In his eyes, I was just another agent of the world's cruelty. Another authority figure demanding something he felt he could not give. And no matter how gently I tried, I could not reach him. Because he wasn't just hearing my words. He was hearing the echoes of every order, every punishment, every impossible demand he had survived. Have you ever tried to help someone, only to realize that your voice wasn't reaching them? It was being filtered through every wound they had ever endured. Yes, I am on my healing path now. I have walked many hard roads inward. I understand better the wounds that shaped me, the patterns I once repeated unconsciously. But even today, I can feel it. The sting of old irritation when we speak. The way a simple conversation can brush against an ancient wound, still tender beneath all the layers of awareness. Healing does not erase sensitivity. It teaches us how to read it differently. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Not a comfortable truth, but a vital one. Irritation is not random. It is not simply about bad manners, different opinions, or small betrayals. It is a messenger, a mirror held up by life, showing us the hidden places inside ourselves that we have not yet fully claimed. When someone triggers a deep reaction inside you, anger, resentment, disgust, envy, it is easy to point outward and name them the problem. But the real battlefield is always inward. Projection is the unconscious process by which we cast onto others the very qualities, fears, or desires we refuse to face in ourselves. What we condemn most violently, what we mock most harshly, what we envy most painfully, are often the disowned fragments of our own soul. The shadow, as Jung described, is not evil by nature. It is the sum of everything we have exiled from conscious life. Our vulnerability, our ambition, our rage, our longing for recognition, our terror of failure. To encounter the shadow is to confront the parts of ourselves we once believed we had to hide to survive. And so the people who irritate us most fiercely are not punishments. They are opportunities, sacred, brutal, and beautiful. They show us where we still hurt, where we are still fragmented, where we have still not yet chosen the courage of becoming whole. Healing is not about silencing irritation. Healing is about reading it, following it inward, asking, what part of myself am I seeing and still trying to deny? Because the journey to individuation, to becoming a true self, demands the integration of the very parts we once cast away. And it begins every time we dare to treat our triggers not as enemies, but as guides. The next time someone triggers you, pause. Before reacting, ask yourself, what secret part of me are they revealing? Triggers are not accidents. They are invitations disguised as discomfort. Every irritation, every surge of anger or resentment, every moment we feel unseen or misunderstood. These are the soul's secret pathways opening before us. But to walk them requires a different kind of courage. Not the courage to fight others, but the courage to face ourselves. Healing begins the moment we stop asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" and start asking, "What is this awakening inside me?" When someone provokes strong emotion, the first instinct is to defend, to explain, to protect the old wound. But projection is a mirror, and every mirror offers a choice. Shatter it in anger, or gaze into it and see what it reveals. True growth happens when we pause inside the irritation, and so the healing path begins, gently, simply, but not easily. First, we must pause. Instead of rushing to react, we hold the feeling in our hands like a fragile thing. We resist the old urge to defend or to collapse. We simply allow the discomfort to be seen, without judgment, without escape. Second, we must turn inward. We ask the deeper question, what part of me is being touched right now? Maybe it is the abandoned child. Maybe it is the hidden ambition. Maybe it is the secret fear of not being good enough. The answer does not always come immediately, but the asking itself begins to change us. Third, we must reclaim. We reach out, not to blame, but to gather back the exiled part. We do not reject the anger, the sadness, the envy. We do not shame the shadow. We invite it back into the circle of our becoming. We make a place for it at the table of our soul. Jung taught that real healing is integration, bringing the unconscious into consciousness, the exiled parts back into the whole. Triggers are sacred because they light up the very places where our consciousness is still incomplete. Every irritation is a flare from the depths, calling us to come closer, not turn away. Not everything others say about us is true. Not every projection is accurate. But the emotional charge, the disproportionate pain or rage or sorrow we feel, is always a map. It shows us where we are still carrying unfinished grief, where we have not yet made peace with ourselves. Using triggers to grow means shifting the entire orientation of the heart. Instead of blaming the mirror, we learn to bless it. Instead of shrinking in shame, we lean closer in curiosity. We ask with humility, what is life trying to show me about myself through this person? And slowly, over time, the moments that once overwhelmed us begin to transform. What once felt like betrayal becomes revelation. What once felt like attack becomes initiation. The wound is no longer just a wound. It becomes a window. This is the deeper alchemy of healing. Not erasing our sensitivity, but sanctifying it. Not becoming invulnerable, but becoming intimate with every part of who we are. Even the parts that still ache, that still tremble, that still burn when touched. Individuation is not perfection. It is the long, sacred process of becoming real. Think of the last time someone triggered you. What did it awaken inside you that still longs to be healed? Healing does not mean that we stop feeling. It does not mean that we become invincible, untouched, indifferent to the wounds of others. True healing means that we stop confusing other people's shadows with our own reflection. It means we learn to offer compassion without losing ourselves inside someone else's storm. We can feel tenderness for those who are still trapped in their old narratives, because once we were trapped too. But compassion is not permission. Compassion does not mean tolerating disrespect or silencing our own growth to avoid unsettling those who fear change. Compassion means seeing clearly, holding love in one hand and boundaries in the other. It means understanding that some people are not ready to meet us where we are, and that their inability to see our wholeness is not a verdict on our worth. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Sometimes, healing means accepting that we cannot always bridge the distance between our journey and someone else's pain. We can offer our presence. We can offer our truth. But we cannot make someone see themselves if they are not yet ready. And we cannot shrink ourselves back into our old wounds just to be understood by those who prefer us broken. The deeper we heal, the more we realize that compassion is not a soft river that carries everyone along. It is a fire, fierce, luminous, discerning. It burns away the old codependency. It burns away the need to be validated by those who could not walk beside us. It burns away the illusion that we must be responsible for anyone else's awakening. True compassion means walking forward, with love, with mercy, but without waiting for permission. Healing is not a performance. Healing is a quiet loyalty to the self we are still becoming. You are not responsible for making others understand your growth. You are responsible for becoming the person your soul was always meant to be. Are you ready to choose yourself? If this journey touched something inside you, I invite you to stay. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and ring the bell to walk this path of healing and becoming with us. Your voice, your presence, your story, they matter here.